Welcome to the River is Lit podcast, the podcast to accompany Medway River Lit, a literary festival for Medway.
Won't you come down, won't you come down, won't you come down to Chatham Town? Oh, won't you come down, won't you come down, won't you come down to Chatham Town?
Hello, I'm BFH, poet and man in the library.
Hi, I'm Sam Hall, playwright turned graphic novelist.
I'm AMJ. I like writing lists and glimmer questing.
And we are the Medway River Lit team. We're Wordsmithery, a literary organisation working in Medway for the past 10 years. Last year, we were commissioned by Medway Council to produce a new literary festival, Medway River Lit. This year, we're delighted to be bringing it back with a focus on the climate and the things that are happening to it.
In this podcast, we'll be previewing writers and books who are coming to Medway River Lit in November. We'll also be giving a little writing tip at the beginning of the podcast and a moment of greenery, our tip on what you might be able to do to help the planet at the end.
Today's recycled writing tip is from one of the authors featured on this podcast, Maggie Harris. When I started writing seriously, I took the advice of my creative writing teacher, Maggie Solly, who advised me to use my artist's eye. I guess that when I'm composing a poem, I am trying to paint a picture with words. But that artist's eye also relates to being observant, focusing on detail, and looking at things a little bit differently, the result of an inquiring mind. Welcome to the River is Lit podcast, episode 6. Today we'll be talking to award-winning poet Maggie Harris and also award-winning novelist Thomas McMullen.
I am delighted to be speaking with Maggie Harris, a Guyanese poet, prose writer and visual artist who has published 6 collections of poetry, 3 collections of short stories and a memoir, as well as having recorded poems for children. She's been on the receiving end of several literary awards, the Guyana Prize for Literature in both 2000 and again in 2014 for her collections of poetry, the Commonwealth Short Story Prize for the Caribbean region in 2014, and the Wales Poetry Award in 2020. So thank you so much for joining me today, Maggie. Can I just start off by asking which of those mediums is your favourite? Or I do appreciate sometimes it feels like I'm asking you to choose a favourite child.
Well, I think poetry will always be the big thing. I mean, I do love writing short stories, and funnily enough, when I wrote my memoir, Kiskadee Girl, I developed such a love for prose. That's when I did the short stories. So I was like on a little bit of a roll then. But mostly, I mean, short stories are really hard, and memoirs take years. I've just recorded my memoir and re-edited it, and so that's been a kind of work in progress this year.
Was there a lot of re-editing to do?
Well, I wasn't really happy with the way it was originally kind of sold, because the publishers tried to sell it as a romantic novel, and it was a little bit more than that to me. It was about Guyanese history and family history, and some of the influences that kind of made up Guyana and my own family. So it was a bit more than a romantic novel. So I wanted to do it again. And I also wanted a new cover, and I wanted to put some photographs in, because when I read people's life stories, I love to look at the photos, don't you?
Me too, absolutely. I really think that helps bring it to life as well, doesn't it?
I think so, yes, that's right, yes. And I wanted to put a little bit more general knowledge in as well. I mean, it's not overly political at all, but it has got a little bit more information about the country and the history, and some of the upset, which kind of rounds it out a little bit more, fleshes it out a bit more, in my mind anyway. So
Oh,
I'm quite
that's
happy with it now.
absolutely. That sounds such a great read. And have you always been a writer, Maggie? And if so, can you give me an idea of how young you were when you started and maybe share with us a little bit of your writing routine?
I always liked stories as a child, and my mum told us stories. And when I went to school and started to study and write, and I was drawn to be that child starting to write in her exercise book, bit of a daydreamer. And I really loved poetry as well when we started to learn poetry. We used to have to learn it by rote in those days. We also had a kind of oral love of it, the rhythm of the words. So I really liked all that. And we're also a very good kind of church going family as well. So you always had the lyricism of the Mass, which was in Latin to start with,
Oh, wow.
and the hymns and all these things kind of fed into just loving spoken word really, and writing as well. Yeah, you asked about routine. I haven't really got a routine. When I've got something I'm working on, then I make myself have a routine. But I'm very kind of in fits and starts really when I'm kind of in the mood, because I don't actually sit down from 9 to 5 like a lot of proper writers do. Always a creative thing for me. I enjoy the creative process. When it starts to feel like work, I don't really enjoy it. I really like to have like every sentence, every paragraph, really kind of coming from the heart and thinking about how the words work and what kind of visual image, it's going to portray. So I remember actually when I first had Kiss Kitty a Pup Girl, before they published it, I was told that the publishers thought it was a little bit too poetic. It was quite tricky because it's like throwing out all your darlings, isn't it? I think with prose, the more you do it, obviously, the more then you can kind of be aware of what works and what doesn't, and thinking about the reader as well. It is a different approach, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. But I mean, it shows your versatility that you were able to take on board what was being said. So if you put some of that poetry back in when you've gone back to it?
A little bit. And it was a new publisher, and he kind of let me do what I want.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And so among all the writing, are you a keen reader at all, Maggie? And if so, do you have any recommendations for our listeners?
I am a very keen reader, and at the moment I'm reading a book set in Wales actually, and it's about a journey through Wales.
Oh, fab.
I lived in Wales for about 10 years. Yeah, we were there for 10 years. And I remember going to a kind of little music festival somewhere in the mountains by Rhyadr somewhere. And it was Tom Buller, who I met for the first time, who had put this little festival on, and it was music and it was poetry tent as well. But he's come up, I think he's written about 3 novels since then. He's a novelist.
Yeah.
And this is really lovely because he just walks around he follows this old road, and he's talking about the history of Wales and the specific places that he goes through, and it's really, really interesting. But apart from that, I've been doing lots of bits of reading because I don't know if I'm working for the Royal Literary Fund. I was approached to send in an application, and what they do, they've got these special reading groups around the country, and I think there are 12 literary fellows who are appointed to do these reading groups. And what's interesting about the groups is that you don't have to read a whole book, and you don't have to kind of do any homework. You just come along, and the fellow, which is me, fellow, I read them a short story and a poem in the session, and then we discuss it. So it's very kind of relaxing, open-ended kind of way of sharing new work. So I've had to do a lot of reading for that because I can choose the material myself.
And it's really lovely, that approach of no pressure, because I think sometimes people can feel a bit overwhelmed before going to certain groups because they think that they're meant to have read this amount or, like you say, do homework.
It's going to be quite a mix of people. I kept the numbers to 12.
Yeah, that sounds great. And if we can just talk a bit about your writing, Maggie, are there certain themes that you find yourself coming back to?
Well, I think Guyana will always come into what I'm writing. I think it's that's where I was born. That's where I lived for 17 years. I mean, I do write a lot of different topics, about migrants and my passion as a gardener as well. I mean, my next collected poems is going to be published next February by Seren, and that's got a lot of plant life in it.
Oh,
You know,
fabulous.
gardener's delight, and it's about the wild, because I get quite a lot of pleasure of gardening myself, and it also gives me things to think about, because with gardening you're always looking forward to what's going to happen, and you never actually get anywhere. There's no destination, and you put a lot of effort into something, because I've got an allotment as well. You put a lot of effort into something and then caterpillars eat it, or you know.
There's no guarantees.
You know, it gives you lots of ideas for writing, which don't have to be about gardening, but it's just that it gives you this kind of time and space and kind of organic connection with the earth to make you think all these fanciful things.
It can feel quite meditative as well. I found that, especially when you're touching the soil, it can be quite grounding, and really, like you say, that it's that connection that I think that I've always enjoyed. And like you say, it's lovely when sometimes you're not on a schedule and you can just lose yourself in that activity. And so we're really looking forward, Maggie, to having you at Medway Rivulet in November. And without giving too much away, no, we really are. Would you be able to give our listeners a taste of what we can look forward to when we see you in November?
Well, I know I'm doing a reading with as part of the Four Poet on the 1st of November, and the net do something on the 10th, and I just went yes. And he said maybe Kiskadee Girl, so it might be something from the memoir. They discovered oil in Guyana about 5 years ago, or maybe more. So it's becoming a kind of rich country in some terms, and yet it's you know, Guyana's got like 80% of rainforest. So the two don't seem to go together in my mind. You know, it's huge changes that are going on. You know, so I've written a little bit about that and about the journey and what it feels like going back after so many years, and you know, that sort of thing. So I'll probably get my notebook out and share a few snippets of those.
No, that sounds fascinating. So, and would you be able to give me an idea of what's next for you? So you're saying that there's a book coming out next year.
Yes, well, I've got a new poetry collection from Seren coming out in February, which I'm really excited about. So that's happening at the moment. We're looking for an image at the moment. And another exciting thing I've done, which I don't know when it's going to be ready, but I've recorded Kiskadee Girl in Ramsgate. Well, Ramsgate Radio have a recording studio. So that's where I've recorded the book.
Oh, great.
And the idea was suggested that I might like for them to serialize the book on Ramsgate Radio. So it'll be like a kind of iPlayer thing. It'll be on their website and people can click on it and listen to it kind of week by week.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for your time this evening, Maggie. I've really appreciated it.
Thank you.
Now it's time for our second guest, Thomas McMullen.
I'm delighted to be speaking with the writer and artist Thomas McMullen. His debut novel, The Last Good Man, won the 2021 Betty Trask Prize, while his second, Groundwater, will be published next year. His short fiction and poetry have been published in Granta, the 3am magazine, and Best British Short Stories, while his journalistic work has appeared in publications including The Guardian, The Times Literary Supplement, Frieze, Art Review, and BBC News. So thank you for joining us today, Tom.
No problem.
Excellent. And if we can start, I do appreciate sometimes it feels like I'm asking someone to choose a favourite child. But out of all of that, do you have a favourite medium that you work in?
Oh, it's a good question. I mean, prose I love because you're kind of master of the house and you can just kind of work on it on your own. You can kind of go as far as you can privately, you know, in your own mind, in a way that, I mean, you know, inevitably there are editors and other people will look at it, but you can really kind of follow a line of thought in your head to its fullest extent, which I really love. But I do kind of miss the opposite end of it, working, because I used to write for theatre and that was a lot of fun. I really like working with actors, and that's the opposite. I like the idea of kind of giving someone, you know, writing something and seeing how someone else interprets it is always a fun thing as well. So it's a bit of a cheat answer, but I guess a bit of both, to both extremes.
And can I ask, have you always written from a young age?
I had memories of writing in primary school and loved kind of telling stories or making little stories up. And it was like the year 6 leavers assembly. I did like a kind of sarcastic or like a satirical sketch of all the teachers, which was really good fun. So I think I do remember then, maybe it's then suddenly you get people laughing and clapping and you're like, oh, this is nice, I should continue doing it, which is probably something to talk to my psychologist about. But it's always fun. I mean, there's just like a genuine joy of making up stories that I think children just know innately. I think, we're all able to do it, and we all kind of do it more or less in different parts of our lives. I guess I just do it. I've just fallen into it as a kind of mania a little bit. But yes, yeah, telling stories is fundamental.
Can you tell us a little bit about your writing routine and how it's changed over time?
Yeah, so my writing routine, it's interesting. I think the thing that's massively changed it in recent years is having a child. So ultimately, when you're kind of like younger in your 20s, like tucking in a bit of writing here and there, you're kind of working full time or, freelance, and then you're kind of doing a little bit of creative work here and there, or in the mornings, like early mornings, or in the evenings, or on the weekends. And I think having had a child, so my son is 3 years old now, you just can't, you're unable to kind of be so kind of flexible with your time. There's particularly when they're like super young, I think it's you have to fit it around your life, but in a more limited way. So for me, I think that made me become a bit more fixed in days in which I'm writing. Yeah. So kind of giving like 1 or 2 days a week where I'm able to kind of really focus on writing, and still doing a bit here and there. I remember when Hugh, my son, was a baby, because I used to write just on like a computer. So like The Last Good Man I was writing, that was pretty much all done on a computer. But when Hugh was a baby, I remember him like sleeping on my shoulder, like a newborn, and then me not being able to get to a computer, obviously. So then writing longhand. So I remember having like a baby on one shoulder and then trying to write with the other. And actually that's kind of, I've kept that up since then, like this idea of writing on pen and paper, which some people do probably, or have done for some time. But for me, it was a bit of a revelation, kind of working out. It's a really different rhythm of thought. You're able to kind of stay with a line of thought. I mean, it's so easy to want to self-edit, I think, when you're writing on a computer. And writing on pen and paper, I actually really enjoy, and I've kind of taken that forward. Yeah, my writing routine is I'll tend to kind of get up early and try and write in the morning, like pen and paper, go somewhere else and just kind of write and see what comes out. And then at some point kind of decant it into a doc on the computer, and then kind of mess around with the pieces and kind of reorder it. But that's the routine I've fallen into recently.
I actually like the fluidity that writing longhand gives you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, because you can kind of cut something so cleanly on a computer that at some point is really useful. Like if you're really trying to kind of sculpt it and put it all together, brilliant. But I think when you're just trying to like turn like that side of your brain that's just trying to like think and see where things go and see what characters come up with or see what situations, allowing them to emerge without it becoming like a fully crafted thing. I think, on long form, writing by hand, it's just harder to kind of cut. I think, you can obviously cross things out, but there's a violence to that almost. And even then it's kind of still there on the page. So it feels, it encourages you, I think, to kind of see where something goes and just kind of go with it, which I find useful. And, particularly at that stage where you're just trying to like come up with ideas and, develop situations.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And I was lucky enough to attend your writing workshop at last year's Medway Rivulet. Do you enjoy this aspect of the creative process, and do you actually prefer to attend or facilitate?
Yeah, I mean, so I teach a little bit with City Lit in London, and I've taught, on a few other courses. I've taught at Arvon for a few universities here and there. I find it really enjoyable teaching, and I think creative writing is one of these things where, it's the lines around where the skill is and begins and ends are so kind of fuzzy in some ways. So it's not like, I'm training to be really good at trombone or, or learning a language. You're kind of, it's more working with students to kind of really like draw out experiences. It's more just like asking questions of their work.
We're really looking forward to having you at Medway Riverlit for the dystopian eco-fiction event in November. And without giving too much away, can you let our listeners have a flavour of what they can look forward to?
So, in terms of that event, I'll read a little bit from The Last Good Man, which is it is a kind of dystopia, and it's set in it's set on Dartmoor in a kind of unspecified future, but there's a kind of implied sense of some world event that's happened, and this is kind of maybe several decades after that. But it's focus in some ways is just on the kind of goings on in the village. You don't really get a sense of the wider world. So although it's a dystopia, you don't get a sense of it's not a kind of world building dystopia about the bombs fell in January and blah blah blah. So it's more kind of, in some ways it's quite theatrical. It's got kind of like a closed set around this village. So I'll read from that, try and get my head back into that dystopian space, because it's the new thing that's coming out next year is very different in a lot of ways.
Okay.
But it'll be enjoyable to have a conversation about The Last Good Man. I think it'll be a fun event.
Brilliant. And can I ask what inspired you?
I used to live in China, so I lived for a couple of years in China and became very interested out there in kind of aspects of the Cultural Revolution. And there's particularly this practice of big letter posters where people were encouraged to have kind of public denunciations kind of written, on literal walls, so kind of writings on posters on walls, kind of encouraged as a mode of self-policing. So, so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that. And I think, originally it was trying to root out anti-revolutionaries, but I think, as you can expect, it kind of descended in a lot of cases into people settling scores or spreading rumors about each other. I was, I guess, particularly interested in how this kind of like local politics, this idea of like community politics in some ways, kind of intersects with this kind of idea of a kind of larger morality, or a kind of, the wall as a canvas for that morality to be kind of put forward.
So what is your new book about?
The new book, so it's coming out next year. It's called Groundwater, and it's about it follows a husband and wife who have just moved to out of London to a kind of woods, a kind of remote house that by a lake. It makes it sound a bit like a kind of horror thriller, which it isn't.
Oh, okay.
It's more. It sounds, the kind of, as soon as you say woods and the lake, it sounds kind of scary. It's more like something like, I guess, like To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, but the idea, they're kind of there, and it's set over a kind of summer bank holiday in 2021, and the wife, her sister and her sister's family are kind of coming to visit. It's mainly about the kind of dynamics that play out between the different characters.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us, Thomas, and we're really looking forward to you joining us at Medway Riverlit in November. So thank you very much for your time today.
This podcast was produced by Sam Hall and hosted by Barry Fentiman Hall and Anne-Marie Jordan. Thanks to Stuart Turner, whose song Chatham Town features in this podcast. Thanks to our sponsors, Medway Council, Your Paper Quest and Dragon Co-working. Also, thanks to our festival friends, Louisa Campbell, Matthew Adcock, Chris Brown, Stuart Turner, Lizzie Perkins, Joe Eden, Marie Crozier, Barnaby Harson and Stephen Keeville. If you'd like to become a festival friend, then have a look at our website to see what you get in return, as well as our thanks. Follow us on Facebook at Medway Riverlit, or Instagram at Medway Riverlit 2024, or visit our website www.medwayriverlit.co.uk. That is it for today. The river is lit. Thanks for listening.